Hey, welcome back. This is the 80th segment of Making Sense for 7 minutes, and it is the 10th segment of 25, where we are taking a hard look at evil and suffering. Now, if you are operating from a biblical worldview, as I am, then the big questions that come up are, how could an all-loving and all-powerful God allow so much or any evil and suffering to continue to take place in our world? And why does he? If you're operating from a different worldview than the biblical worldview, then your questions are going to be different, and your speculations and conclusions are going to be different. Now, of course, if your worldview, which is different from the biblical worldview, happens to be the wrong worldview, then your speculations are going to be out of whack, and your conclusions are going to be wrong. Now, having said that, operating from a biblical worldview, I've been offering 5 appeals, defenses, if you will, to the issue of God being all-powerful and all-loving, even in the face of all-pervasive evil. Now, keep in mind that the biblical worldview says that his being all-powerful and all-loving is not in any way negated by the presence of evil. And the defenses that we've looked at, the first 4, have been the appeal to a suffering God, the appeal to origins, the appeal to mystery, and the appeal to free will. The 5th is the appeal to God's larger purposes, or, as has been referred to, it is the greater good defense. Now, consider this. If the ultimate good is yours in my pleasure and self-sufficiency or self-fulfillment, if the ultimate good is yours and my pleasure or self-fulfillment, and God's purposes must serve these ultimate good, then you're going to be hard-pressed, nay, dare I say, you're going to find it impossible to see how there is any answer to the question of evil that could appeal to God's higher purposes. However, if the supreme end of what God's up to transcends you and me, our transcendent goals, then this appeal really warrants some serious consideration. Let me give you 2 examples that I think are the primary examples in the scriptures. The first is the story of Joseph, as recorded in the book of Genesis, being sold into slavery. And Dr. Tim Keller writes and puts it very simply and accurately what was going on. Joseph was an arrogant young man who was hated by his brothers, and in their anger at him, they imprisoned him in a pit and then sold him into a life of slavery and misery in Egypt. Now, doubtless, Joseph prayed to God to help him escape, but no help was forthcoming. And into slavery he went. Though he experienced years of bondage and misery, Joseph's character was refined and strengthened by his trials. Eventually, he rose up to become a prime minister of Egypt, who saved thousands of lives and even his own family from starvation. If God had not allowed Joseph's years of suffering, he never would have been such a powerful agent for social justice and spiritual healing. Now, listen, in the Bible, this account is summed up really well by the very words of Joseph himself, where he interacts with his brothers, the ones who years before had sold him into slavery and had this act of violence against him. He said, "As for you, you meant this for evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." You can check this out in the book of Genesis. Now, maybe this is not the best analogy, but it is an analogy, and that would be a surgeon who cuts a person, ultimately not to harm, but to heal. And then finally, the best example and the most important within Christianity has to be the suffering and death of Jesus Christ. It is through the death of Jesus that the greater good model is really displayed. The Bible asserts that God sent Jesus to endure some of the cruelest and most abusive punishment that eventually led to his death. And all of this was for the purpose of redeeming humanity's fallen nature. Inside of Christianity, we understand that the death of Jesus results in the ultimate good for humanity. The greater good defense is a solid defense. Thanks, y'all.